And we are live. Hello, guys. How are you guys all doing? You guys, we have less than 2 weeks for the test. Can you guys imagine that? Less than 10 days for the test. Are you guys ready? Ready or not? You guys will do great. Just don't stress. Don't stress and study these last couple of days. So let's present here. Start. Okay. Okay. Sorry for that. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about types of boundaries, disputes, and then territorial morphology. Again and again and again, don't forget to show up on these streams if you're taking any other AP classes. We have math and English on Mondays. We have social sciences on Tuesdays. On Wednesdays, we have sciences, and then Thursdays, we have histories. Okay, so don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we have Fiveable has a new platform on account on Facebook and TikTok. So don't forget to follow us on there at Think Fiveable. And again, you guys, I know you guys are familiar with this by now, but your test is on May 12th. On May 12th, and it's gonna be two portions, 2 of our Qs, right? And I don't know if you guys know, but college, if you guys want more test practice, for us it's DPQs, but for AP Hug, I'm pretty sure you guys have over 20 FRQs to practice. So those will be very helpful, guys. Practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better you will get at it. And also don't forget to correct your work. This is how you learn. This is how you learn. If you do the work and just whatever, just like submit it, or if your teacher actually requires it, if you just submit your work, you literally don't know, like you're not learning anything, right? You need to correct your work, and the College Board has specific ways for you guys to actually, like, the College Board wants you to answer the questions specific ways. So that will be a good practice for you guys to get for the test. And the more you do, the better you will get on test. Trust me, practice is key. Okay. So today we're gonna be talking about types of boundaries, but we're also gonna be talking about morphology in the first section. So I didn't include that in the agenda, sorry. And then we're gonna be talking about boundary disputes too. If you have any questions, guys, put them down in the question section. Okay, morphology. So morphology, as most of you guys should be familiar with these terms. You should be familiar with about these terms by now. This is from chapter 4 from politics, I believe. Yeah, it's chapter 4 from politics. This whole section. So morphology is basically the shape of states, and depending on that shape of the state, there can be some advantages for that shape, or it can create disadvantages and conflict within the state itself. So we're gonna cover the basic, like the shapes, and we will talk about the conflicts or the disadvantages these shapes will give, right? So the first example is elongated shape, which basically means like just a long and narrow shaped like border of a country, right? And like ideal example of that, as many of you guys know, is Chile. And it can be elongated vertically like Chile, and it can be elongated horizontally like in Gambia. bottom example. And for elongated, I would say there's no. I mean, if we can you guys think of an advantage for elongated shape state? The only thing I can think of is there are like multiple climates that can exist within. Okay, coast. Yeah. If it's but it's not. Yeah, in this case, that's right. In the case of Chile, that's right. But Gambia, no, because it's landlocked from the other sides. So yeah, a lot of resources. That's right, because it's covering a lot of land, so there can be a lot of resources within that land, and I would say different climates that can be maybe an advantage. I don't know, like just for the people living in there. So, gotta ask you about it. Okay, so some conflict that can obviously create disunity, right? People are not going to be feeling really connected. Like if you look at the south and the north in Chile, for example, or the east and the west portion of Gambia, people are not going to really feel connected because there's so much distance, right? And even the distribution of resources can be not equal or not equally distributed throughout the country. Maybe in, do you guys know what usually resources are distributed around the capitals, like the capital of the country, or like the second largest city in the country. So we can see that lack of resources happening in elongated states. And also it's longer borders obviously will equal uh, it will result in a harder way to defend the borders, right? Because if you have longer borders, you're gonna have to have more military, more soldiers, more equipment during war and stuff like that. But like for example, of Chile, that doesn't really apply. Do you guys know what's surrounding the borders of Chile? There's geographical feature that surrounds the border of Chile. Do you guys know what it is? Yeah, the Indian Mountains. Yeah, that's right. That is right. Good job, guys. We'll move on. Fragmented. We're gonna have to move on kind of, I think, faster today because there's a lot to cover. But we'll stop if you guys have any questions. But this should be, honestly, this presentation is a lot of vocabulary, and obviously, like, if you hug is a lot of vocabulary, right? You guys know by now. So if you guys are just familiar with the vocab word, what does it mean? Most of them are self-explanatory, right? Most of them you actually can guess what it is based on what the word itself. But you should be able to be familiar with the word, like the morphology, the name of the shape of the state, and then maybe get some couple of examples, be able to remember a couple of examples to write during a FRQs, right? So fragmented basically is when a state has several discontinuous pieces, right? It's not, the discontinuous pieces are not really connected to the mainland. So an example of that will be China. I know it's not really I didn't know that China is discontinuous, but this northern, if you guys look at the map, the the eastmost like tip, right, of India is kind of disconnected from India. It's this land is being disputed by Bangladesh, and India has a lot of Muslim majority in there, but that land is not really connected to the mainland. If you see it, it's kind of out there. It's not really connected to the mainland. And another example, is Angola. Yeah. So it has a kind of like a land, cam cam Campinida, the land that's part of the home part of the country, but it's not really connected by it in any form. So this can cause problem over controlling the region, right? If the land is not if that piece of land is in another country, it's going to be very hard for the country to be sovereign over that land because it's physically not connected, right? It's going to be harder for the government to control it because it's far. It's in another sovereign country. And that is example. It's Congo, right? It's in Congo. And do you guys know what term we use? What term we use when there is there is like for what term we use when there's like a sovereign state within another sovereign state? What do we call that sovereign state? The small sovereign state that's encompassed by the larger state. Do you guys know what this is called? There's a vocabulary word I can say. Enclosed. It's very close to enclosed, but it's not enclosed. No, perforated is not. That's not for sure. Perforated, we'll talk about perforated. Perforated is basically the larger state that encompasses the smaller state. Yeah, it's enclave. That's right, Sarah. It is so perforated is the larger state that encompasses the enclave, the smaller state. That's the smaller state inside the larger state. This is it's fine. This question is this vocabulary is perforated and enclave gets confused a lot. Okay, so perforated is next. So yeah, so a state that encompasses another state. That's the basic definition that we can come up with that will not really confuse us. And you can just think of a state with a whole, like if that's like the last thing, or like if you guys think of like notebook papers, right? That notebooks, right? They would have perforated endings to it, like holes, so you can tear them. That would be another thing, another way to remember the word. And Lesotho and Switzerland in South Africa are not the perforated states. They are the enclaves in South Africa. South Africa itself is the perforated state. It's the perforated state because it has these two holes in them, right? The South Africa is not the government of South Africa is not sovereign over these two states. These two enclaves are they basically govern themselves, right? They have their own rules, they have their own laws. Obviously, they're gonna be kind of affected because they're landlocked. Especially Lesotho is landlocked, right? They cannot access any kind of resources, so it might be kind of have to like be under the control of the South African government. But that's another thing, right? We're talking about politics in this. Okay, so prorupted. Prorupted is shape is when there is a long extension of land from the state. Usually the proruption happens because of the need to access for resources, right? So resources like water, water, natural resources. So an example of that will be sorry. Okay, an example of that would be the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the map is to the bottom left of the screen, and we see the corruption, right? Do you see the left corruption, the corruption to the left, to the east side of the borders of the country, right? This corruption allows the Democratic Republic of Congo to access, right, water from the Atlantic Ocean, right? That can result in trade. Just accessing water is important, right, in many forms, for many reasons. And then Namibia here in southern Africa, we see another extension to the western part of the border, and this is another example of corrupted states. And this shape can be an advantage and disadvantage, right? We talked about how It allows countries to access resources, while also it will create problem over governing, right? That corrupted piece will be harder to govern by the government, and also there might be like the people themselves might not be connected that much to the people in the mainland, because they're not like physically, right? They're not physically connected. They're not physically connected to the rest of the country. So now we're going to be talking about boundaries. Oh, that's good. We're only like 15 minutes in. We're done with third of the content. Before we start borders, is there any questions you guys have? Any questions, guys? No questions, guys? We will, let me see. We will talk about boundary disputes after talking about defining boundaries. We will talk about different boundary disputes. Like after talking about boundaries. But do you guys have any questions about the previous stuff? The morphology part? If not, we can move on. Okay, so we'll move on. So, one question. Okay. So, what countries' historical events should I prioritize for the exam? Honestly, like this is a very generic question. Oh, the question went away. Where is it? Okay, it's a very generic question, so I can't really answer it in detail. But because human geography basically covers like a lot of it covers basically we're talking about basically about every like most cultures and most political disputes on like the globe as a whole. So I can't really say what countries or like you can prioritize. But for historical events, I would say like understanding colonialism, right? Which you guys have covered it, right? I'm pretty sure you guys have covered it. Like over Africa, we're gonna be talking about that a little bit today. We're gonna be talking about colonialism. We're gonna be talking imperialism, obviously, not colonialism. But understanding how if those two events, like those huge two events, right, colonialism, imperialism, how they have shaped today's world, like today's map, especially of Africa. Today I'm talking about Africa a little bit. I would say these two events, but I can't really say I can't really answer the question fully. But yeah, that's I think the best answer I can give. Countries, let's see, countries maybe like the superpowers. If we're talking about like the superpowers, how their policies or how they have affected the politics of the modern world or the geography of the modern world. Again, we go back to Africa and how it was divided by European powers in the what 19th century. Okay, we'll move on and we'll cover a little bit of that today, hopefully. So yeah, defining boundaries. Boundary. Oh, where is the? Okay. Okay, so boundary is basically the definition of boundary. Boundary is an invisible. Boundary is an invisible barrier or line that separate one state from another. purpose usually is to establish sovereignty. If we're talking about states, right? So the 50 states within the U.S., right? Those have different boundaries, and each state, right? We have federal laws and we have state laws, right? And each state has each state basically is sovereign, right? It's not connected to the other states, right? So each state is kind of independent, even though each state has to follow federal laws, right? But each state can make its own laws, right, based on its le- legislations, right? And then here, Palestine versus Israel. This is another example of a border, right? Israel, there is a lot of dispute over that land, and this is another example of the purpose of drawing that land is to establish sovereignty over or control over that land. Why is combat? I'm very sorry, guys. we we forgot to cover convex shape. Okay, I'm very sorry, but this is okay. We'll cover it and then we'll go back to boundaries. I'm very sorry. The slides are a little bit off order. Okay, so basically it's a round shaped state, and this is basically the the ideal shape of a state, I would say, because it allows for different it allows for different advantages, I would say. If the state is rounded, right, there's no any projections or proruptions, access to resources will be kind of equal. In the example of Kenya is a very poor country, right? Because we can't really apply those advantages to the country, unfortunately. But we can see the shape of Kenya is a compact shape, right? It's rounded. There's no projections. It's for the most part it's rounded, and it's sent there's a like you know what I mean, right? And then government control will be easier because of the rounded or because of the borders are not really far apart. And nationalism too. It would increase nationalism because people will be physically more connected to each other. Physically more connected to each other. Because they're living next to each other. There's no distance. And even climate will be I would say the same for the most part, because it's so it's so together, and the people are so the border. I mean, it just depends on how big the country is, right? The area of the country. So yeah. So types, now we're gonna be talking about boundaries. We're going back to boundaries. So we have three type of boundaries. We have cultural boundaries, we have geometric boundaries, and we have physical boundaries. We're gonna be covering. I think we're gonna be focusing mostly on cultural boundaries with the example, so we'll see. So cultural boundaries basically divide ethnicities, right? Ethnicities, languages, and religions. A great example of that is Ireland and Northern Ireland. I want you guys to tell me what is this culture division? What kind of culture division does exist between Ireland and Northern Ireland? Do you guys know? It's a cultural, so that's a hint. It's a cultural division. Yes, right, Nicole. So yeah, that's right. So Northern Ireland is mostly Protestants, right? And Southern Ireland is mostly Catholics. And I know right now we're in the 21st century, right? These should not be divisions. Those divisions were occurred after the Protestant Reformation in the 15th century, and then they still exist until today. We don't really we don't really like to talk about religion as a division, because obviously the religion is a division factor between nations, but talking about Ireland, it's a very advanced developed country. But these divisions still are seen, right, in the demographics of the people living in there. We still see that Protestants are kind of isolated up there, and Catholics don't really interact, but like interacting with, with Protestants. Same thing with Protestants. So that's interesting to see. And then India is another example. I'm giving examples. I want you guys to tell me what are these kind of divisions. So what is the division that exists in India? Or I'm talking about the cultural division, right? What is the cultural division that exists in India? Hinduism, Muslim, right, Sarah? That's right. Hinduism, Muslim. So in Pakistan and India used to be one country, right? During imperialism, when England, right, had control over the whole land. When India got its independence, right, it kind of like these two, like Muslims and Hindus, kind of isolated. So India now has a majority of Hindus and a minority of Muslims, while Pakistan has a minority of Hindus and a majority of Muslims. So basically, there was a lot of migration going in and out from Pakistan and India when the borders of India were established to account for the Muslims and the Hindus. So if there were Muslims living in India, they would migrate to Pakistan because of the majority of Muslims in Pakistan. And okay, no, never mind. And do you guys know what this map is of what? It's an island in very close to Turkey. It starts with a C. You guys, it's a great example actually of like all of these ethnic cultural divisions. What is Cyprus? Yes, it is Cyprus. Okay, so basically, the northern part is controlled by the Turkish government, and the southern part is controlled by Greece. And we see that there is a buffer zone actually. If you see the border between them, there's a buffer zone between them. Buffer zone. What are buffer zones, guys? It's another vocabulary word. What is a buffer zone? What is a buffer zone? Let's go. What's a buffer zone? No idea? Okay. Jaylee, it's an area, yeah, it's an area between two separate. What does it really do? Like what's its purpose? Okay, so buffer zones are basically zones that are not controlled by anybody. There is no really sovereign country that claims control over that land. And the reason, like for example, for here, right, it's a buffer zone. The reason for that is to decrease tension with these two nations, right? If they're not so close to each other, they're not gonna like, I don't know, like kill each other, right? Or go into conflict with each other, right? Because there's a land that separates them. So that's the buffer zone. And make sure to know that for the states, buffer zones are very like important to know. And okay, so we're talking about Turkey, right? The northern part of Cyprus is controlled by Turkey, and the southern controlled by Greece. And we see here there is like a ethnic division, right? Ethnic division. We see a language division, right? The northern speaks, I would say, it speaks Turkish, right? Because controlled by the Turkish government. And the southern controlled by Greece, so they don't speak Turkish, right? Obviously. And then religions too. Turkish tend to be or have a majority of Muslims, and southern Greece, I would say they're Christians. Geometric boundary. We have one question. Okay, let's see the question. Is the boundary between India and Pakistan antecedent or consequent? What about the boundary between the UK and Republic of Ireland? Okay, we're gonna be covering. Okay, I don't wanna answer that question right now because we're gonna be covering the different boundaries Like, we're gonna be covering it in the next slide. So I'm not gonna answer the question right now because we're gonna go off. It's not off topic, obviously, but I don't want to review something and then go back to review it again. Okay. Okay, so geometric boundaries are basically like are drawn based on the parallel lines of latitude. So it's a straight line that serves a political boundary that is unrelated to a physical or a cultural difference. For the most part, it's unrelated. So some examples, we see the division between South Korea and North Korea. We see the 38th parallel of latitude, right, that divides these two nations, right? So it's an example of geometric boundary because it's based on the latitudes, right? Based on the parallel latitudes, and it also divides two sovereign nations. We have, this is like the ideal example of a geometric boundary because we're so familiar with it. The 48th parallel that divides line that divides the United States with Canada. Sorry. And then we have Chad too. It's also divided by a kind of straight parallel latitude line. Okay, so physical boundaries, those are the boundaries that exist because of geographic features, right? Because of deserts, mountains, oceans, cliffs. Can you guys give me some examples of the physical boundaries before showing up the examples we have? What are some physical boundaries, or what are some countries that exist with physical boundaries? What are some sovereign states that are surrounded by physical boundaries? Chile, yeah, this is like an ideal example, right? Chile. Another example? Yeah, Pacific Ocean, that's right. Pacific Ocean can be but it's not a, well, depending. Well, yeah, it can be a border. Yeah, that's a valid answer. Yeah, that's why I was thinking. Yeah, Alice says do count because they are boundaries, right? They're surrounded by oceans, right? But it is a boundary itself, right? Because they're located inside, like in the middle of ocean. Oh, they do count. I would say they count. Yeah, they count as physical boundaries. I believe France too. France has a mountain, right? A mountain. Is it northern? Where I don't remember honestly, but I know France has a physical like a mountain that divides it with. Is it Germany? I'm not sure. I don't know what side of France it is. Okay, whatever it is, we'll move on. It's good to know just a couple of ones. You don't need to know more than, I would say, more than two. You don't need to know. Okay, now we're gonna be talking about creation of boundaries. The question Sarah was talking about. Uh, so there are different examples. We have like 5 examples. We don't have that much time left, so we'll cover them pretty quickly, and then we'll talk about questions if you guys have anything at the end. So antecedent boundaries are boundaries that exist before cultural landscape. So these exist usually because of the physical features of the land. They're not really dependent on who occupies the land or what kind of religion lives in a land. Obviously, right? Like, culture modifies the physical features, but these are boundaries that exist because of physical features, not because of culture itself. So we're always going back to Chile, right? Chile and the Andes Mountains are a great example of that, right? They've always been dividing Bolivia. I mean, they've always been dividing Bolivia and Argentina from Chile, right? They've always been dividing them. So it's not based on culture, right? But people migrated there and they lived in there. But it's not based on culture because it's just a feature. It's always have been there. What was Sarah? If you don't mind, can you type your question again? Because I don't remember what it was. I didn't read it, so I pressed answer, so it disappeared. Maybe we can go back to it. Let me see. Okay, how about, okay, we'll review this and we'll go back to the questions so we don't waste all the time. Okay, so relic boundaries. Relic boundaries are boundaries that exist because of their meaning, like because of the meaning they have. It's not, but they no longer exist. They're just attached to the, what does it say? A relic boundary is one that no longer functions, so it doesn't really exist, but its meaning still exists, right? Its meaning is still there. Its meaning is still there. So Berlin Wall is a great example of that. It's a great example of that, right? It was built by the Soviet Union in Berlin, right? Okay, so basically, I'm pretty sure you guys know the history. You guys should be able to know the. Well, to explain it, you have to kind of know, right, the history. Okay, so after World War One, right? World War Two, right? World War Two, not World War One. World War. Yeah, World War Two. Um, Basically, Germany was divided into like these four sections. French sector, we have the British sector, and then the American sector, and then we have the Soviet Union sector. So, but the whole thing is Berlin was in the middle, right? The Berlin state was in the middle of all these sectors. The Soviet Union decided to create a wall to separate their eastern side from the western side influence, right? So the wall was built in 1961 by the Soviet Union, East Germany, right? While the wall was largely so the wall disappeared in 1986, but there's still some remnants. There's still some remnants of it, and still some remnants in it, and some parts of it still exist, I think, until today. But it's not that it exists or not exist anymore, but it's the effects, the cultural, like it's a symbol, right? The symbol of suppression, right? The symbol of people, the suffering that happened between these two walls, the people that suffered in the eastern part of the wall, and it's the meaning that the wall leaves behind. It's not really the wall itself if it exists or not exists. And there are some physical remnants of it, and there is some like symbolic remnants to the wall. So yeah, so imposed boundaries are another example of superimposed boundaries. These are boundaries that are kind of forced by other nations. So we have boundaries that are drawn on an area by a conquering or colonizing country that ignores existing cultural patterns. Sorry. And again, Africa, the scramble for Africa. This is a great example of that, right? Sorry. Okay. So this is where in the 19th century, I believe, right? Superpowers, European superpowers came together during imperialism, right? And they basically decided to divide divide Africa into different regions, and to basically occupy them, right? Get control over that land. But they basically did not really account for the difference because Africa is ethnically so diverse. It's very diverse. They speak so many languages in there. So many languages, so many different ethnicities with so many different backgrounds. So when you put all these ethnic people together that are so different, conflict is gonna occur. Conflict for sure is gonna occur, and that's what we see in the history of Africa, right? So whatever Africa, just the scramble of Africa is just a great example of superimposed boundaries. I don't think you can find a better example of superimposed than the scramble of Africa because it's so massive and it's true. And then subsequent boundaries. Subsequent boundaries are established after the settlement in an area, and it changes as culture changes. So this is basically the opposite of antecedent boundaries, it's basically the opposite. This is based on culture. Based on culture and the people, the language, the religion, culture, language, religion, ethnicities that exist in a region. So Yugoslavia is an example of that. After the Yugoslavia was basically one land. It was, I think, controlled by the Soviet, right? I think it was controlled by the Soviets. And after it kind of got its independence, or like the balkanization. What's the balkanization, guys? Tell me what balkanization is. Balkanization is a vocab word. What's balkanization? Balkanization of Yugoslavia. What's balkanization? Breaking apart. Be more specific. Separation of a state. Yeah, more specific. Based on what? Separation of state based on what? I would not say independence. Yeah, so separation of state based on ethnicities, right? So when separation of state based on ethnicity, yeah, that's definition. Basically, Yugoslavia separated. If you guys see the compare two maps, right? The one on the left and the on the right. We see after it was balkanized on the right, we see these different borders that you can say subsequent borders, right? That were established like between Serbia, right, and Bosnians, right? Serbians and Bosnians, they have different religions, right? Different religions, different. They speak different languages. Croatians and Slovenians, or too, right? They're ethnically different. They're ethnically different people that speak different languages, and most of them practice different religions. So that's how the map of Europe kind of were shaped after the balkanization. That part of the world, that part of Europe, was shaped after the balkanization of Yugoslavia. And this honestly is a good type of boundary because it prevents conflict. If you have people that are the same, you're not even gonna have conflict over, because there's nothing really that they can disagree on. Like religion is a big factor that can cause conflict, honestly, and language too, right? If people really can't communicate with each other, yeah. So those are subsequent. It's based on culture. You know that subsequent is based on culture. And then I think I was talking. Okay, so I think this is. I think I put this on. Okay, so I put this on because most of European boundaries can account for subsequent boundaries. Okay, because they're ethnically different. People living in Europe, France are very different than Germany, right? The people living in French are so much different than Germans, right? They speak different language. The same they practice the same religion, but I believe France are Catholic, majority of Catholics, while Germany is more Protestant, and they speak different languages. And I think yeah, we were talking about the geographic physical boundaries. France and Germany, I think, are separated by a mountain. Is it? No. Never mind. Sorry. France and Spain are separated by a physical mountain that makes a border between France and Spain. So yeah, and many of these European countries are redrawn. Most of like in the during the Inquisition, like very let's see, in the 14 in the 15th century, Spain and Portugal used to be one land, one kingdom, and then they separated. They separated. Even Germany, the boundaries of Germany are not the same ones that existed a century ago. So consequent boundaries are drawn in order to separate a group based on ethnic, linguistic, religious, and economic differences. Okay, so an example of that. So it's consequences are also gonna be separations between cultures, but the difference between consequent and subsequent is that consequent kind of imposed by are kind of like are kind of like imposed by the features of the land, the features of the land. So we see India, right? India before the partition, when it was part of the England, part of England where it was controlled by England, and then after the partition, right? After the partition, we see the Pakistan, right? Pakistan, country of Pakistan gaining independence, and I believe that there is a separation, right? There's a physical separation. There's a I'm not quite sure. I think it's a mountain that separates India with Pakistan, and this is another example of where these two nations, Pakistan and India, are separated culturally by religion, and then physically by a physical feature. Ooh, it's 45 already. Okay, we will move on, and then we will go to the questions really fast. So what is a frontier? Are frontier and buffer zones the same thing? Not. Let's see. So frontiers are basically no, not. I don't. Okay, no. Because I don't think frontiers serve the same purpose as buffer zones. Frontiers are basically when there's no really direct control over an area. Like there is no purpose where people would want to control that area. Like Antarctica, right? The Antarctica is basically a desert. There's no reason why somebody would really want to control it, right? Have a military bases in there. And then prior to 1912, the U.S. West was also can be counted as a frontier because there was no really like kind of sovereign, like it wasn't really controlled by anybody. Whatever farmer could come in there and then occupy the land, it would be theirs. And then the frontier between the Arabian Peninsula, I think this is a great example because the frontier between Oman, the Saudi Arabia, and then United Arab Emirates, I think that land is a desert. So there is really no control over that land. I'm pretty sure that the land is a desert. That's why it's not controlled. It's not controlled by anybody. Yeah, yeah. Sarah, I was thinking of that too. It's more separating. Like there's a purpose to it, but buffer frontiers are just like lands that are also not controlled by anybody. But okay, now we're gonna be talking about boundary disputes really fast. I'm very sorry, guys. We were supposed to. Oh, we have a lot to see too. Okay, we will cover that. It's okay. We will go over it now. It's okay. So, we'll talk about boundary disputes and some examples of the law of the sea disputes. So, definitional disputes. Those are okay. Those are also definitions, right? You also have to understand the definitions of these disputes. So, definitional disputes basically countries that do not agree on the original intended boundary, right? Right. I would say example of that would be Israel and Palestine versus Palestine, right? Because of Zionism, right? Because of Zionism, the Israel kind of got the Jewish population got a state in Israel, in current day Israel, but there were already Muslim Arab population living in that area. So Muslims and Jewish people in there are kind of in conflict because of it's kind of a definitional dispute because they don't really agree on like the Arab in there don't agree that Jewish people are coming and occupying the land. On the other hand, the Jewish people kind of that was their very long, very old land of their fathers. So that's the definitional dispute. Locational dispute is caused by shifting the original boundary. So the Mississippi River is an example of that. Some part of the Mississippi some people in Mississippi see themselves as Louisiana because the Mississippi River kind of shifts over time. An operational boundary is major issues caused involving boundary. So border crossing between the states, the United States and Mexico is an operational boundary. It's not. It's a dispute over boundary, right? Who's able to cross? When are they able to cross? Why are they crossing? All this drama, right, going on from the U.S. and Mexico, right, between the U.S. and Mexico. Allocational dispute over what is dispute over the use of what is on or what is in the boundary. So natural resources, disputes over fishing rights, right? We're going to be talking about land, law of seas. We will go over what is boundary between the U.S. What is boundary? I don't know when that question was, but I think it was prior to the prior to the the presentation. So it would be an operational boundary dispute. And what type of boundary? Like, you mean land? Let's go back to this and see. Wait. Okay, so the U.S. and Mexico, they're separated by. It's not a relic boundary, right? It's not superimposed boundary. You can say superimposed boundary because of the because that land was basically California, for example, was covered by Spanish, but they were kicked off the land by Europeans occupying the northern side. So you can, it's not, I don't want to say super, I would say subsequent, because there's so much difference, right, in ethnicities and culture and language between Mexico and the US. But I don't use the US as an example. It's not an ideal example of that. It's not an ideal example of that. You have to get like solid examples. Yugoslavia is a great example of subsequent boundary. But I won't really give them, I don't know, I don't really like answering that question that much. Because it's not a solid answer. Okay, so second question, can this be within a larger state like Spain with Catalonia, or does it only divide independent countries? I'm believing you are talking about the different boundaries, right? So no, it does not have to be within independent countries. It can be within within a sovereign state. And Catalonia is a great example of that. They actually want to get their independence, right? And I believe they're also separated. They're culturally they're culturally separated from the rest of the Spanish people. So it's subsequent boundary, and I believe also they're separated by a mountain. I'm not sure, guys. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that northern part is no. I don't think it's. I don't know, guys. Am I right? Am I there? Is there like a mountain that separates the Catalonia part from the rest of Spain? So if there was a mountain, it would also be another example of consequent, because they're culturally separated by, but also it's separated by a physical feature. Let's move on. So land of the sea. So land of the sea basically defines or makes it lawful for a country to fish or extract fresh national resources away from their coast. So there are like 4 sections. We have the internal waters. This is where like all the landlords side. This is where like the country has complete control over the land. They're just like, it's internal waters. It's their water, so they have complete control over it. 12 miles away from the internal waters, we have territorial land. Territorial waters where states have the right to control who can pass through that land because they're so close to them. And contagious zone is where the country has the right to impose laws that can regulate population and immigration, right? Who can come that close to the land so that they can, I don't know, migrate through land, or pollutions who can throw in trash and pollutants inside that land because they're so close. If they throw really serious pollutions, they can really affect the homeland. And then we have the part where everybody fights for, the EEZ zone, exclusive economic zone. That's where fishing and natural resources rights come into place. And you have international waters where no state has control over. We have one question. We're going over an hour, guys. Can you share the URL of the slideshow? Okay, so yeah, so the slideshows will be the link for the slideshows will be up on Fiveable, the website. If you go back to the replays, like a couple of hours after I finish after we finish with the presentation. So yes, I will share the link. Okay, so this is, I believe this is the last slide. Okay, and then we have the law of the sea disputes. This is like the major dispute, right? It's still going on, I believe. Yeah, it is still going on. What do you mean? It's still going on. It's the South China Sea. It's basically a dispute between like 5 countries over the land over there, over the sea and fishing rights, right? So this land is very, 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 very rich in resources. It has 10% of the world's fisheries. It has 11. These are estimates, obviously. 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion feet of natural gas. So it's a big economic gain. Whoever gains controls over the land gets all these resources. And 5 countries fight over that land: China, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And basically, China right now is because the most powerful country over there. It's basically claiming the land. It's kind of not acknowledging any of the other countries claiming the land. And one thing, there's this sparkly islands in the land where they're basically like small islands, but China. So whoever controls the islands will basically control the sea, right? Because they will expand their EEZ zone, right? Exclusive economic zone. So they will be able to gain those resources, right? Extract those resources. So China basically is claiming those lands, and they're basically sending military forces to conquer, kind of, or get control of each land, each island, so they can. And China is also doing a reclaiming, like land reclaiming, where they would send like big ships and they would jump in sand to create islands inside the ocean, to create islands and to extend their EEE zone, again, exclusive economic zone. And this kind of has created a tension between the U.S. and the U.S. and China, because the U.S. kind of sent in their navy military to stop China from doing that. And there's a lot of like the U.S. kind of using its power to impose like laws of international waters, more laws, and the UN is kind of involved also. The U.S. putting pressure on the UN to stop China from doing that, and it's creating a lot of tensions between the 2 countries, and because both of them are so powerful. So we are done. Weekly streams again. Don't forget to tune in into these streams if you're taking any of these other AP classes. And again, don't forget to follow us, especially on Instagram and TikTok. TikTok has TikTok. Can you guys believe that? And at Think Fightable, and on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And is there, guys? I'm gonna be streaming. I'm gonna be doing a study guide, a Q&A session this Thursday. So is there anything, guys, you guys actually want to learn, like a unit? Because I remember last time you guys were talking about agriculture and politics. The politics unit, we did a little bit of politics today. So I don't know what other subjects you guys want to learn about as we're getting closer to the IP exam. Type something in the box chat, guys, if you want something really specific. Anything, guys? No? Nothing? So we will have a Q&A session this Thursday. Let's see. If it's 10 a.m. at Pacific time, so Eastern time would be what? It would be 1 a.m.? 1 a.m., right? I think would be 1 a.m. Ethnic cleansing examples? Okay, we'll see. Very specific. Because we have to have a main topic, like a main unit, and we can talk about other stuff if have any other questions. But we need like a main. Okay, so we will wrap it up for now. And that's it. Let's see, wait. Is the boundary between the U.S. and Mexico also locational because of the Rio Grande shifted? Yes, that's right. That is the right example. Yeah, that is right. That is right. I did not remember that, but that is right. The Rio Grande does exist between the U.S. and the U.S. and the Mexico border. That's right, and it has been shifting. So, see, like the border itself is not shifting, but because the feature on the border is shifting. So the definition of the boundary is still there, but the physical feature is shifting. But the boundary is still there. The boundary is not gonna shift because of the water shifting, if that makes sense. So yeah. So that's it for now for today, guys. We're right over an hour. Not that bad. Have a nice weekend, guys. Stay safe, stay healthy. Don't forget to study for the test. And you got this. You got this. And don't forget to use the resources the College Board provides. Practice FRQs. Do like 2 every day. That's not bad. And correct them. And see how you do. So yeah. Have a nice day. And bye. See you next week.